The 48th magnificent floor of Calverso was sealed behind colossal glass walls, casting Munich's gray-blue skyline like a static painting. Inside, a 10-meter walnut table lay beneath a blanket of cold LED lights. The air held the expensive blend of Italian leather, freshly ground coffee, and projector metal, the familiar atmosphere of billion-dollar deals. Adrian Faulkner sat at the head of the table, back straight, white shirt crisply ironed, navy tie adjusted so precisely that the stitch line hugged his collar as if measured by laser. He listened as Mark Bissett rambled on about AI-oriented logistic algorithms and the projected EBIT growth for the upcoming fiscal year, while the red laser pointer danced across record-breaking profit markers. The phone, face down beside his right hand, gave a slight buzz, a tremor no louder than a silver spoon against crystal. Adrian glanced down. The OLED screen lit up in white, displaying an unfamiliar plus 49-163 number and a paperclip icon indicating a video file. Both internal security policy and personal habit forbade opening unverified links, especially mid-meeting. Yet the plus 49 prefix and the familiar 163, Hamburg style, reminded him of someone he'd only referred to in scheduled, recorded calls for the past 6 months, and in silence. An unnamed feeling, half dread, half compulsion, guided his finger to the screen. The video opened with no sound, the frame shivering gently from the winter wind outside the balcony. Through the slightly fogged window was the Adriatic gray marble kitchen Adrian himself had designed for the Hamburg house, now cold. On the ash-gray tile floor, Elodie, his 7-year-old daughter, was kneeling. She wore a thin t-shirt, bent forward scrubbing the floor with a sponge until her knuckles were bruised red under the harsh overhead light. In the left corner, Helena Marchand, his ex-wife, sat cross-legged on a bar stool, scrolling through her latest flip phone, her face tinted bluish by the screen's glow. In the right corner was Marcus Adler, the new boyfriend, leaning against the fridge, half-finished beer in hand, eyes split between a Bundesliga match and a TikTok feed. No one looked at the child. Then Elodie looked up, not at anyone in particular, and murmured almost inaudibly, "I'm sorry. It'll be clean soon." The video cut off abruptly at second 38, replaced by a black screen reflecting Adrian's widened pupils. His breath caught. His jaw clenched until the corners of his mouth turned white, and his fingers unconsciously gripped the phone's metal edge. In the pristine glasshouse setting of Calverso, Mark's voice still glided through profit margins. Slide clicks marked rhythmically. Fountain pens tapped lightly. But Adrian was no longer present. The kitchen scene and the words, "I'm sorry," etched into his mind like a laser engraving. He stood. The Italian leather chair creaked softly, just enough for the 3 nearest directors to pause their typing. No apology, no "I'll be back." He strode down the length of the table. Mark stuttered mid-presentation. Helena Kraus, the CFO, looked up as the red pointer trembled over the chart. But no one dared ask. Calverso had no protocol for a CEO leaving the room before the conclusion. The glass door shut automatically behind him, severing all discussion. His footsteps echoed through the oak floor corridor, fast enough to activate the VIP elevator's fingerprint scan. He pressed B3, the deepest garage level. Neon lights reflected off rows of gleaming black cars like a warship fleet at rest. Adrian chose the graphite gray Bentley Continental GT. The scent of fresh leather and cold petrol filled the cabin as the V12 engine purred. He turned off the music, ignored the GPS, shifted into sport mode, and hit the accelerator. The garage gate rose with a laser scan, releasing the Bentley onto Beerstrasse like a silent bullet. Winter streets mirrored streaks of yellow light beneath the misting rain. Through the windshield, traffic signals blurred into a trail of red dots, drifting backward as he sped on. Behind him, the meeting room with EBIT, M&As, and IPOs shattered into glass dust in the rearview mirror. Ahead, in the map of his mind, remained only one coordinate, Hamburg, and the image of Elodie on her knees, whispering an apology to the floor for the crime of existing. The Bentley hurtled into the late-night dark, its headlights sweeping across a film of rain as thin as smoke. The traffic jingle on the radio played faintly. Adrian turned it down to silence, letting nothing but the V12's low growl pulse beneath the metal. Once clear of Munich's ring road, the A9 stretched ahead like a ruler, roadside lights thinned, and blue signs slid past the window. Nuremberg 180 kilometers, Leipzig 367 kilometers, Hamburg 774 kilometers. The HUD speed readout leapt to 210, then 230 kilometers per hour, yet the air inside the cabin felt viscous, as if time itself clung to the leather seats. The harder Adrian pressed the accelerator, the louder the ache in his chest. No wind, only the phrase, "I'm sorry," on endless repeat. He tried to overdub it. "No, Elodie, you don't have to apologize for existing." But his voice lodged at the back of his throat exactly as it had a year ago before the judge when he chose silence. The wet glass recalled his last glimpse of Hamburg from the courtroom. He'd stood beside his lawyer, spine straight as rebar, thinking, people will say Adrian Faulkner bought custody with money. He hadn't wanted Elodie growing up under tabloid headlines. So he let Helena keep custody. In hindsight, that ruling was no different from the road sign he'd just flown past, a 1-second nod that rerouted his daughter's life. Rain thickened. Wipers flicked water and road dust into countless white streaks. Adrian eased down to 160 kilometers per hour and switched on the seat heater. Raststadt Frankisch Schweiz West 5 kilometers flashed by, his stomach clenched with fierce hunger. He took the exit, tires crunching on gravel. The overnight service stop held only a few lorries under sallow sodium lights. Engine off, he sat, his breath merging with the rain tapping the roof. He turned to OFF, the cabin felt like a bunker. Adrian opened his phone's old photo album, the shot of Elodie sucking a strawberry ice pop at Tierpark Hellebrunn when she was 4. The smile lit her whole face, a drop of ice cream still on her small chin. He couldn't recall the last time she'd smiled like that. One certainty now, he would not arrive in Hamburg empty-handed. A toxic environment claim without direct evidence was a club beating against the walls of law. Adrian dialed Tobias Hertz. 3 rings, the lawyer's voice hoarse with sleep. "Adrian? It's midnight. I need to initiate emergency guardianship. There's a video. No physical injury but clear emotional abuse. No injury is always a but in a judge's eyes. You'll need a witness and a solid reason for intervening only now." Adrian exhaled hard. "Reason? I've been stupid and silent for 6 months, is that enough?" Silence, then Tobias softened. "I'll call Jugendamt in the morning, see if they've got any sealed files. And I'll line up an independent investigator. Pull over for a while. Rest." Adrian hung up but didn't rest. He slid the lever to drive, rolled to an empty bay, killed the headlights, letting the darkness project its question, "Why didn't I see?" He remembered the trial, Helena in an emerald silk dress, crying on cue, trembling to tempo, recounting lonely nights while Adrian flew across continents chasing deals. The judge nodded. The PR firm had told him, "Don't counter with emotion, your personal brand is reason." So his reason stayed silent and ceded the day to Helena's tears. That same reason had just turned a child into a floor scrubber. Outside, the rain stopped, mist rose. Adrian fired up the engine and merged back onto the A9. Needle hit 200. Near Ingolstadt he called Mila Varga, ex-Europol inspector, now a freelance security analyst. "Mila, I need a family investigation package. Address Hamburg, name Marcus Adler. Triple rate. I want it before dawn. It's barely midnight, Faulkner. Data doesn't pour like espresso. What's going on? My daughter is disappearing while alive." Keystrokes sounded then. "I'm on it. Ease off, holiday patrols around Erlangen are tight." Ending the call, Adrian dropped to 170 kilometers per hour, yet the engine still felt like an anvil on his chest. If the legal system needs blood to move, he thought bitterly, I'll cut myself open for evidence. The fuel gauge sank. At 3 o'clock he swung onto the northbound A7, a sign for Hanover 270 kilometers gleamed in the lights. The sky darkened further, a blue thread edging the eastern clouds. Adrian realized he couldn't recall the lullaby he'd once sung to Elodie as an infant. Was it Der Mond ist aufgegangen? Or had he never sung at all? The thought severed something in his hand, leather creaked as he crushed the wheel. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The whispered loop fused with the wind's hiss, a savage refrain. Indicator on, he pulled into the emergency lane, hazards flashing. He folded over, forehead on the wheel. A single convulsive breath escaped, not quite a sob, but sharp enough to sting his lungs. In the cabin's rich leather scent, Adrian Faulkner lost control for the first time. No staff, no reporters, only him, endless meters of merciless asphalt, and the vision of a child scouring the floor as if erasing herself. 5 minutes. 10. A passing lorry's draft rocked the Bentley, nudging him to rise, to continue. Adrian lifted his head, eyes dry, restarted the engine. He merged back into the lane. He would reach Hamburg before the city woke. Between now and sunrise, he could not stop, not for petrol, not for doubt, not for any memory clutching at him. Because at the road's end stood the gray stone kitchen door, and his Elodie was still kneeling there, waiting for someone to knock loud enough for the world to hear. The sun had just pulled free from the horizon over the Hamburg harbor, its first light streaking across the Elbe River in a dirty smear of yellow like old paint left unwashed. Adrian Faulkner saw it from afar through the Bentley's windshield, emotionless. He had driven all night, hundreds of kilometers without rest, without pause, haunted by the image of Elodie kneeling, scrubbing the floor, her hands red and raw, her whisper of "I'm sorry" looping in his mind like a curse. He didn't stop in front of Helena's house. Didn't ring the bell. Didn't pound the door like some frantic father demanding his child. No. He hadn't come to lose control. He'd come to win, but not with the power of a CEO, not with media influence, not with a PR team. This time, he would win by forcing the system, the very one that once silenced him out of fear, to listen. He parked 3 blocks away in a quiet residential area where sparrows still slept in their nests and no window lights had yet flicked on. His hands gripped the steering wheel, the veins still raised from 10 hours of relentless driving. He picked up the phone and called Mila Varga, the private investigator and former Europol agent, not to gather evidence but to expose the entire web tightening silently around Elodie. "I need everything you have," Adrian said, no greeting, no preamble. Helena Marchand. Marcus Adler. Financial transactions, therapy history, behavioral red flags. Anyone who's had access to that house, former nannies, teachers, neighbors. "I need witnesses. No instincts. No guesses. Real people. Are you ready to face them?" Mila asked, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "This isn't a business dossier. It's a file made of fear. It won't fit on a graph. That's why I need you," Adrian replied. "I don't need sympathy. I need the truth spoken in a language the court understands." "All right," Mila said after a beat. "You have 72 hours. I'll unlock everything." He hung up, then called Tobias Hertz, his lawyer. "I want to file for temporary guardianship," he said flatly. "This week. The video is strong enough to initiate." "Videos don't win court," Tobias said. "You know that. You need a reason why you stayed silent for 6 months and why now." Adrian was quiet, then replied, blunt and bare, "Because I was an arrogant idiot. And I was wrong." There was a long pause before Tobias exhaled, slow and deep. "I'll get the paperwork started. But remember, no one hands a child to a father who's been absent half a year just because he has a sad clip. The court wants evidence, someone who saw it. Not a camera. Not a feeling. A human being in the flesh." Call ended, Adrian sat in the car, gazing at the silent row of houses ahead. He once thought silence meant stability. Now he knew silence could be the mask of damage happening in plain view. He couldn't kick down the door. But he couldn't stay seated while his daughter became a shadow whispering sorry when no one had even spoken her name. That afternoon, Mila's first report arrived. Adrian read every line like an obituary for the trust he once had. Helena Marchand, no criminal record, no filed complaints. Underwent mild psychological treatment in 2019 for emotional regulation disorder, a polite term for losing control without legal consequence. Financially stable, supported by monthly payments from Adrian and shares awarded during the divorce. Marcus Adler, no criminal file. But 2 former girlfriends, one declared bankruptcy, the other changed her name and vanished from all social media. No formal complaints. But both, when interviewed anonymously, used the same phrase, "He didn't hit me. He made me disappear." Adrian reread that line 3 times, "Made me disappear." Not physical violence. Not shouting. Something more insidious, a wound that convinces you you're invisible. The final section was about Elodie. Private school, Lindenhof Academy. Teacher comments, polite. Never disruptive. Never asks for anything. Always finishes tasks early. Rarely smiles. A note from the school counselor sliced like a blade. Student uses the word sorry reflexively. Avoids eye contact. Tends to choose solitary, non-attention-drawing activities. Mila had also included scans of Elodie's drawings from the past 6 months. Adrian printed them all and spread them on the glass table in his hotel suite. No colors. Only pencil. A house without doors. A small girl in the corner with the words "Ich bin nicht laut, I'm not loud," above her. A staircase leading nowhere, captioned, Tutmir laid, I'm sorry. No blood. No bruises. But every stroke of the pencil was an internal wound. Adrian closed the file. Stepped out onto the balcony. The cold air struck his face like a wake-up slap. This wasn't a startup pitch deck. This was where children learn to vanish without being told. His phone buzzed, a message from Tobias. Judge requires a real witness, someone who has seen Elodie's living conditions firsthand. Without one, odds of rejection, 90%. Adrian didn't reread it. The message was the seal on a truth he'd long known but avoided. No one believes a rich father unless he brings someone who's also hurt. And then a face appeared in his mind, quiet, steady, always present. The woman who cleaned his office late at night, always greeting him with a gentle Guten Abend, her Faulkner. Rosa. She wasn't an expert. Not a lawyer. Not a doctor. But if she had sent that video, then she had seen. And if anyone had stood outside that house and truly looked inside, watched Elodie fading while no one stepped in, it was her. Adrian picked up the phone. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of realization. This victory wouldn't come from strategy or logic. It would come from someone who dared to say, I saw. And I can't stay silent. Rosa Moretti was usually present in the hours when no one else was awake, in the floors of Calverso long abandoned by the powerful, leaving behind conference tables that still smelled of cold coffee, spreadsheets still glowing faintly, and fluorescent lights humming like the building's metallic pulse. She had worked there for 15 years. No one remembered the last time they looked her in the eye except Adrian. He never forced friendliness but always acknowledged her. With eye contact. A nod. A quiet thank you. Enough for Rosa to remember, Adrian Faulkner wasn't just another corporate paint job, he was a father who'd once been late to work because his daughter had a fever, who had stood outside a glass-walled boardroom for 15 minutes after a personal call. That's why, when Rosa had seen Elodie through the window that day, a child on her knees scrubbing the floor while her mother laughed at a phone screen and the new boyfriend turned up the TV loud enough to drown feeling she couldn't turn away. Not out of duty, but because some things, once seen, can't be unseen. She recorded the video. Unsteady. Unprofessional. But clear. Clear enough to send. Clear enough to reach the part of Adrian she believed still existed. 10 days later, Adrian knocked on the janitor's supply room door at Calverso near midnight. Rosa was hanging up her rubber gloves. She looked up surprised but unafraid. From already, Adrian said, voice low. I believe you were the one who sent me that video. Rosa didn't deny it. Didn't flinch. She nodded, tired but firm. Yes. Why? She paused, searching for words delicate enough not to shatter. Because I saw a child who couldn't raise her voice. And I thought if anyone had the power to do something, it was you. I had nothing else to give. Adrian inhaled slowly, stepped inside, shut the door behind him. Do you realize your testimony could change everything? I don't want to testify in court, Rosa said, voice trembling. I don't like lights or cameras. But if speaking means she can leave that place, then I'll speak. Adrian sat on a wooden stool beside the supply shelf. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders sagged, not from weakness, but from no longer being alone. Can you tell me everything you saw that day? Everything you felt? I'm not a professional witness. But you're a mother. Rosa lowered her gaze. Her eyes welled up. My daughter was once with a man who hurt her. Not with fists, but by making her apologize for everything. By erasing her smile. One day, she just stopped smiling and started cleaning a spotless kitchen. Over and over. That hit Adrian like slow-breaking glass in his chest. Cleaning a spotless kitchen. Erasing your own existence. Rosa, he whispered. If you're willing, we need a statement. Tobias, my lawyer, can help you write it. You won't have to face anyone. Just tell the truth. Just the truth? Only the truth? Rosa looked directly at him for the first time. Not at a boss. At a broken father trying to rebuild. She nodded, fingers tightening on her canvas bag. I'll do it. Not for you. For the girl. Because no child should grow up thinking they have to apologize just for being in the room. The next day, in Tobias's office, Rosa sat before a microphone. She read her statement. Her voice was tired, unpolished, unforced, but heavy. I saw the girl. Alone. Kneeling on the floor. No one spoke to her. No one asked. No laughter. No names. Just the sound of small hands scrubbing. She wasn't cleaning dirt. She was cleaning to exist. Tobias looked at Adrian and gave a slight nod. We have a witness. Neutral. Not a relative. An eyewitness. No stake. The court will listen. That night, Adrian returned to the hotel. He opened his laptop and saw all the files Mila had sent. drawings, school notes, therapy history, Marcus's hidden transfers. He opened none of them. He played Rosa's audio recording. And for the first time he sat still, letting someone else narrate the pain he had ignored too long. No charts. No degrees. No theory. Just a voice, slow, sure, shaking true. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen that child erase herself. Adrian leaned back. He didn't sleep. But he didn't dream either. He knew from this moment it was no longer a custody battle. It was an indictment of silence. And thanks to Rosa, that silence now had a name. Courtroom 4 of the Hamburg family court was cold, perhaps by design, to suppress emotion. No stained glass. No artwork. No symbol of blindfolded justice balancing the scales. Just rows of hard wooden benches, white walls, a long table for the judge, and on either side, the lawyers, the respondent, the petitioner, people who had once loved each other now standing as opposition. Adrian was the first to enter, his dark suit tailored perfectly like armor, but his face betrayed what had long slumbered and now awakened pain with purpose. Tobias walked beside him, carrying a leather briefcase filled with hundreds of pages, files, drawings, recordings, statements, all indexed. Not much. Just what mattered. Helena arrived next, in a dark velvet dress, with her attorney, a woman in her 40s, meticulously made up, wearing fashion glasses, eyes sharp with intent, ready to paint Adrian as an absent, careless father whose presence now served only to reclaim lost prestige. She didn't look at Adrian. Her gaze rested on a corner of the table, a small space where someone had once stood, once placed a little backpack, once sat cross-legged, once smiled, once whispered sorry. She avoided that gaze the way people avoid mirrors when they know the mirror will tell the truth. The judge entered, a silver-haired woman with eyes deep as still water. She didn't speak unnecessarily. She didn't smile. There was no warmth but no coldness either. Only certainty, as though she'd presided over thousands of cases and had learned that silence comes in many forms, some harmless, others lethal in whispers. Helena's lawyer opened. Her voice was measured, rhythmic. She laid out a clear narrative. Adrian, a global CEO absent for 6 months, no consistent visitation schedule, had canceled 2 planned visits due to urgent work matters. She concluded, Mr. Faulkner is undoubtedly a busy man, but busyness is not evidence of affection. We don't dispute his love for his daughter. We question whether he is capable of caring for a child who needs daily attention or whether this is merely a late attempt at redemption. The courtroom stayed still. Helena said nothing. She only nodded slightly like she had rehearsed it, as if pain could be repackaged as credibility. Tobias stood. No rebuttal. No accusations. He simply said, Your Honor, we call our first witness, Rosa Moretti. A shift in the room. Helena frowned. She didn't recognize the name. Not until Rosa entered, white blouse, dark slacks, her face pale, but her posture steady. Not the confidence of power, but the stillness of someone who had accepted fear as part of loyalty. Tobias asked, Ms. Moretti, how long have you known Mr. Faulkner? 15 years, she replied. I clean at Calverso headquarters. And the day you recorded the video sent to Mr. Faulkner, what happened? Rosa swallowed. Looked directly at the judge, not at Helena, not at Marcus in the back. I was walking past that neighborhood. My cousin lives nearby. On the way, I looked through the window. I saw a little girl kneeling, scrubbing the floor. No one spoke to her. No one looked. Only the TV and a phone screen. I didn't know what to do. But I knew if I stayed silent, I was part of how she was made to disappear. Tobias asked, Did you know the girl? I met her twice at Mr. Faulkner's office. She once drew a rabbit and taped it to the printer. I remember it because it was the only color in that entire room. The judge looked up. She didn't write. She only listened. Tobias activated the projector. The video played. No one spoke. When Elodie whispered, I'm sorry, a sharp breath caught, quiet but audible, from Helena. When the clip ended, the judge gave a small nod, then called for the drawings. Elodie's teacher entered, a slender woman, hair neatly tied, carrying a folder of student art. She spoke gently but firmly. Elodie is polite, but never initiates, never asks, never argues, never laughs out loud. We thought she was just shy, until we saw her drawings. She held up the first, a house with no doors. Then another, a small girl beneath the words, be small. Be good. These aren't play. These aren't doodles. This is a language no one taught her. This is survival. No objections. Nothing left to say. The judge turned to Adrian. Mr. Faulkner, do you have anything to add? He stood. No papers. No glances. He looked directly at the woman above. I'm not here as a CEO. I'm not here to win. I'm here because I failed. Silence. He continued. I believed avoiding conflict was the best way to protect my child. I thought by stepping back I was creating peace. But that peace wasn't for my daughter. It was for the adults who wanted comfort. He swallowed. His voice shook but didn't break. She never screamed. No one hit her. No one starved her. But every day she was taught that her presence was a burden. That sorry was the price of existing. That silence was goodness. He looked around. No blame. Just the certainty born from utter defeat. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking that my daughter be allowed to live like a child. And if that means I must turn this whole system upside down, so be it. But I hope today we won't have to. He sat down. No applause. No tears. The judge wrote a few lines. Then looked up, face unreadable. This court grants temporary custody to Mr. Adrian Faulkner, effective immediately. The case will remain under review for 30 days. But as of today, Elodie Faulkner will live with her biological father until a final ruling is issued. No gavel strike. Just words. But it felt like the whole room had been torn from its usual rhythm. Adrian didn't rejoice. Helena didn't collapse. Marcus wasn't even present. Only one person stood, brushed Adrian's sleeve as she passed. Rosa. She whispered, she'll know. That someone saw her. And didn't look away. Adrian gave a small nod. Then walked out, shoulders straight, heart steady. For the first time, not because he won a case, but because a child no longer had to apologize for being seen. The white wooden door opened with a soft click and Elodie stood still in the doorway as if unsure she was allowed to step inside. In her hand was a gray backpack with worn straps and a faded fox keychain frayed from being clutched too often. Adrian knelt down. Said nothing. Didn't open his arms. Just nodded his quiet greeting. He had no idea what she felt. He didn't guess. Elodie stared at him, unblinking. No resentment. No joy. Just the blank gaze of a child who'd learned never to expect. This is your home, Adrian said, still kneeling. His voice wasn't warm. Just real. You don't have to ask to be here. You don't need permission to speak, to laugh, to draw, or to ask for seconds. You only need to be you. Elodie nodded barely. Didn't speak, but didn't turn away. The small room to the left of the freshly cleaned attic apartment was hers. Not a converted living room. Not a temporary setup. A real room, walls painted soft butter yellow, linen curtains patterned with clouds, low shelves stacked with comics, no obligations. She picked the paint color. Adrian had taken her to the hardware store, spent hours in the sample aisle while she stayed silent, finally resting her hand on a swatch, a shade of yellow, not bright, but warm. Like sunlight behind sheer curtains. You want this one? It looks like my old blanket, Elodie whispered as if fearing she'd said the wrong thing. Adrian nodded. Then this is the color. He painted it himself. No contractors. No rollers. Just a brush, a tin of paint, and time. Elodie didn't help, but she sat in the doorway the entire time, hugging her fox pillow, watching each stroke closely. As if those brush strokes were a map leading her back to a place called aloud. The first days she didn't laugh. Didn't cry. Didn't ask. She ate little, slept lightly, flinched when doors closed, and always left her backpack by the door, like a guest who knew she could be asked to leave at any time. Adrian didn't push. He just taped a note to her door. No need to knock. This is your home. He cooked breakfast based on what she nodded at in the supermarket. Plain spaghetti, peeled apples, eggs without yolks. He bought her fox pajamas when she lingered in the aisle 2 seconds too long. Didn't ask, do you want this? Just picked it up and dropped it into the cart. That night, she took off the tags and wore them. At night, he left her door ajar. No night light. Just a soft salt lamp. He slept on the couch for the first week so she'd know if she came out he'd still be there. Sometimes, near midnight, he heard tiny bare footsteps. Not to wake him. Just circling. Checking. Then returning to bed. He didn't stop her. Didn't ask. Once when she paused by the kitchen hall, Adrian opened his eyes and said softly, I'm still here. She nodded. Didn't smile, but went back to her room and didn't get up again. By the second week, Elodie started drawing again. First just circles, then suns, then a little girl on a hill holding a flag. Adrian made no comment, no praise, no questions, just kept a frame ready and hung each drawing in the hallway. One morning, she saw one framed. She stood for a long time, didn't smile, but pressed her hand lightly to the glass. A small print stayed behind. Then, on the third night of the third week while they were watching cartoons, An episode about a lost cow and a giant pancake. The character slipped and stumbled clumsily, and Elodie laughed. Not loud, not long, but it was a laugh. Adrian didn't turn, didn't react, just kept watching, but his eyes burned. And in his heart, everything he'd ever missed, ever failed, ever been too late for, was washed clean by that single simple note of laughter. That night, as he tucked her in, she asked softly, "Tomorrow, do I have to leave?" The question pierced like a stitch through the chest. Adrian sat on the bed's edge, careful, unhurried. "No, you don't have to go anywhere. This is your home. No one will make you leave." Elodie looked at the ceiling, said nothing, but her breathing slowed, eased, and for the first time she slept through the night. Adrian didn't leave the room. He sat against the wall, head resting on his shoulder, hand touching the edge of her bed. Not like a guard, like someone guarding a treasure that could disappear if he blinked. In the fridge was a jar of berry jam Elodie hadn't opened. In the drawer, an unfinished drawing. In the bathroom, tiny bunny slippers. Each object, a proof of quiet trust. She was trying slowly to believe she was allowed to stay. No one declared victory. No one recorded the recovery. There were no fireworks, just a quiet night, pale yellow room, and the soft, even breathing of a child, finally asleep in a home she no longer had to knock to enter. Time after the court hearing wasn't measured in days or weeks. For Adrian, it was measured by things so small the world rarely noticed them. The first time Elodie asked, "Can I have another piece?" At breakfast. The first time she didn't flinch at the sound of the door lock turning. The first time her backpack wasn't left right by the entrance but was instead hung neatly inside the wardrobe in her own room. There was no milestone loud enough to tell the world that a child was learning to trust kindness. But for Adrian, every furrowed brow that softened, every movement that no longer carried defensiveness, every bold stroke in Elodie's drawings, each was a new chapter in the story he had vowed to rewrite, page by page, even if it took the rest of his life. On a Sunday morning at the end of the month, sunlight poured across the butter-yellow wall in Elodie's room, forming small window-like patterns on the carpet. She sat playing with building blocks, hair loosely tied back, fox pillow in hand as usual. Adrian stood at the doorway, watching her like a traveler gazing at a mountain he once climbed in a storm, now quiet under a clear sky. "Do you like it here?" he asked, not expecting a clear answer. Elodie looked up, head tilted slightly. "I do, but I don't know if I'm allowed to stay." Adrian sat down across from her. He didn't smile, didn't make promises. He simply said, as if tracing a newly drawn map, "As long as you want to be here, this is your home. And if anyone ever tries to make you think otherwise, I'll remind them, you are not a guest." Elodie nodded. Then she reached for her colored pencils and began to draw on a new sheet. A house, with open windows, with a bed, a dining table, people, and for the first time, sunlight. At night, the two of them folded laundry together. Elodie gave names to each pair of socks. Soxy, Sir Shrub, Princess Tangle. Adrian would ask each sock, "Does Sir Shrub want to sit next to Soxy?" Elodie would laugh, then place them neatly in the drawer. Adrian realized he didn't need to do anything grand. No expensive gifts or trips abroad. What she needed was never a reward, it was unconditional presence. One evening, Elodie drew a different picture. In it, a child stood beneath a rainbow holding a map. On the map were 3 bold words, "Safe place." Adrian hung it in the hallway outside the kitchen, next to the framed drawing that said, "I am not small." The next morning, Elodie saw it, touched the glass gently, then turned to him. "Daddy, is that map real?" He nodded. "Yes, and you found it." In the 4th week, Elodie began telling stories, not from her past, but imagined ones. About a fox who loved reading, a Lego brick castle, a robot afraid of cats. Each evening after dinner, she sat at the table and told Adrian her stories in a steady voice, like reading from memory. But Adrian knew she was teaching herself how to speak without apologizing. He never interrupted, never corrected her words, never asked, "Why are you telling this?" He just listened, like someone standing beneath a tree, letting each leaf fall into their hands as a gift. One night, while he was washing dishes, Elodie came from behind and gently wrapped her arms around his waist. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He stopped, dried his hands, bent down, and returned the hug. She stayed a moment, then returned to her coloring, as if nothing had happened. But Adrian stood still for a long time after, as if he had just been touched by something too sacred to name, only to be grateful for. On Saturday morning, a letter arrived, no return address. Adrian recognized the handwriting, Helena's. He didn't open it in front of Elodie. He waited until nightfall when she was asleep and sat alone in the kitchen to open it. It was just one page. Adrian, I'm undergoing treatment. I don't expect your forgiveness. But if you still love Elodie, protect her, even from me. I didn't realize I was making her disappear. I thought I was teaching her to be neat. I was wrong. Just do what I couldn't. Never make her apologize for being herself. Helena. Adrian folded the letter. He didn't cry. He wasn't angry. He just felt something within him, quietly close. Like, not complete, but enough to know that truth doesn't need a winner. It only needs to be acknowledged. Later that weekend, Elodie started a journal. A small leather notebook Adrian had given her without explanation. She sat on the living room carpet, head bowed, tongue peeking out slightly as she concentrated, like she used to when she was little. Writing something happy? Adrian asked softly, stepping closer. Elodie looked up and smiled with two missing baby teeth. I'm writing a story about a girl who used to scrub floors. But then, she built a castle out of drawings. Adrian crouched beside her, brushed her hair, and whispered, and this time, no one makes her scrub the floors again. Elodie nodded, then added, her castle has doors that stay open all day, and someone keeps the map in their heart. Adrian froze. He didn't know where she learned those words. Maybe from books, maybe from pain, but now, they were a child's manifesto of rebirth. He sat down beside her, saying nothing more, letting his shoulder rest gently against hers. Close enough so she'd know. Dad is here, not to fix you, not to keep you, but to make sure you never have to disappear again. They stayed like that for a long time, on the rug in their home under warm light in peace. No more apologies, just stories, and a map that leads back to the place where you're allowed to be alive. Spring morning light poured through the kitchen window in quiet beams. Elodie sat at the dining table, legs swinging, hands busy cutting out cloud shapes from colored paper. Adrian was making coffee, but his eyes never left his daughter. 6 months had passed. 6 months since Elodie stepped over the threshold of his small apartment, carrying not luggage but caution, soaked into every movement. Now, she was different not by growing older but by being allowed to simply be herself. Dad? Elodie said, interrupting his thoughts. Can I bring my drawing to school? Adrian was a little surprised. It was the first time she'd spoken of school as somewhere she wanted to go, not had to. Of course, he replied. You want to show it to your teacher? Elodie shook her head. No, to my friend. I made a new friend. He likes castles too. Adrian smiled. He didn't ask more. He knew that for Elodie, every word was a step across once forbidden terrain, a place where emotions were forgotten and silence had once been armor. That week, Elodie's teacher sent an email. The subject line read, "A big step." In it, she shared that Elodie had raised her hand in class, not to answer a question but to ask one. A simple question. What if the dragon in the story wasn't really bad? The whole class went quiet, the teacher wrote, not out of confusion, but because it was the first time she asked to hear an answer. Adrian read the email and sat quietly for a long time. He remembered those early months when Elodie asked nothing, shared nothing, moved through her days like a shadow fulfilling expectations. Now she was challenging the world with curiosity. One evening, while Adrian was arranging books, Elodie walked into the living room carrying a cardboard box he thought she'd forgotten, the box she'd placed on a high shelf her first day here, where no one would touch it. Dad, she said, I want to open it. Adrian set the books down, sat beside her on the rug. Elodie lifted the lid slowly as if unfastening a memory. Inside were scraps of paper, broken crayons, an old hair clip, a plastic doll with a smudged eye. "I used to call this the quiet box," Elodie whispered. "Every time I felt sad, I'd put something in. But I never told anyone." Adrian didn't touch it. He just listened. "I thought if I got really good at hiding things, they'd disappear. But they don't. They just stay. In here." She placed a hand on her stomach. He nodded. "No need to interrupt." Elodie pulled out a crumpled slip of paper. Scrawled in faint pencil. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to be quiet the right way." Adrian felt his chest tighten. He wanted to rip the note apart, hold her, tell her it was never her fault. But instead, he asked, "Would you like to write a new one? Not to fix it, just to change the message." Elodie thought for a moment, then nodded. He handed her a clean sheet of paper. She wrote slowly, with care. "I'm not sorry for having a voice." Then she placed the new note into the box. Closed the lid. Gently. Not with sadness. Not with fear. Just with closure. Adrian ran a hand gently down her back. "You don't have to keep that box if you don't want to," he said. "I want to," Elodie replied. "To remember that I don't need it anymore." The following week, Elodie was chosen to be the narrator at her class's story time. Adrian came to watch. He sat in the back row, silent like every other parent, but his hand gripped his sleeve when he saw her walk up to the little podium. Elodie held the book, opened it, and began, not loudly, but clearly. This dragon was afraid everyone would hate him, so he pretended to be scary. But one little kid wasn't afraid. The kid walked up and said, "I think you're just sad." A small pause. And then the dragon didn't need to roar anymore. He just needed a friend. The class clapped. Elodie bowed her head, then looked up and searched the crowd. When her eyes found Adrian's, she smiled, not to be praised, but as if to say, "See, Dad? I did it." Adrian nodded, his throat tight. He had once feared losing Elodie, to the court, to distance, to silence. But this very silence, when wielded rightly, had become the soil where her voice could grow. That night, as he was about to turn off the lights, Elodie ran out of her room holding the quiet box. "Dad," she said, "I want to change its name." He blinked. "Change it?" "Yeah," she said. "Now I'll call it the remembering box. Because what I used to feel is still part of me too." Adrian knelt down and embraced her. "Then we'll keep it. Not to hide anything. But to remember you don't need to hide anything anymore." Elodie nodded, placing the box on a low shelf within reach. No longer high and hidden like that first day. No longer a secret. And Adrian understood. Elodie had stepped into a new chapter. One where she no longer feared the sound of her own voice. A chapter where every small word had the right to be heard. Not through loudness, but through the quiet courage of things once silent. They passed like the gentle breath of a summer not yet named. In the small apartment shared by Adrian and Elodie, life was no longer an escape, it was a slow rediscovery of how to live, step by step, gesture by gesture, through a love that asked for no proof. One Saturday morning, Elodie woke earlier than usual. She stood before her bedroom window where the first light of day always touched the wooden floor. Squinting at the dust motes floating in the sunbeam, she turned to look at the room with the quiet curiosity of someone rediscovering familiar ground. "Daddy," she called, "I want to change rooms." Adrian was surprised. "You don't like this room anymore?" Elodie shook her head. "No, I do. But I want the new room to be something I choose. Not just a place I was allowed to be in." Adrian understood immediately. It wasn't about space or paint, it was about the right to choose where she belonged. They went to an old furniture shop on the main street, full of mismatched pieces, none from a set, none by design, but each full of character. Elodie didn't pick the first bed she saw or the prettiest shelf. She touched each item, sat down, opened drawers, and finally said softly to Adrian, "This one feels like it belonged to someone who had a story." Adrian smiled. "And you want to have your own story here too?" Elodie nodded. They brought home an old desk with a purple ink stain in the bottom drawer, a slightly loose rocking chair, and a leaning bookshelf. But to Elodie, everything was perfect. The new room wasn't a guest room nor a catalog-perfect girl's bedroom. It was Elodie's room, the room of a little girl who once feared her dreams had no place to land, now with an entire space to anchor them. One evening, Adrian passed by her door and saw it ajar. Inside, Elodie was drawing not dragons or castles this time, but a house with a balcony full of flowers, a man making coffee, and a girl with her hair tied to the side, smiling brightly by a window. "Who's that?" Adrian asked from the doorway. Elodie didn't turn. She only said, "Light as air, that's me. But this time I remembered to color it in." He stepped in, sat beside her. They said nothing more. Just looked at the picture together. It was simple. but real, and perhaps to Elodie that was what mattered most. That weekend, Elodie brought the memory box out to the balcony. She placed it next to the lavender pot they had planted together a month earlier. "Daddy," she said, "I want the box to see sunlight too." Adrian nodded. "Because it deserves light too? Because I'm not ashamed of it anymore." His throat tightened. No speech was needed. No declarations. Just a child choosing light over shadows on her own. A few days later, Elodie invited a classmate over for the first time. Adrian quietly prepared cookies and juice, staying out of the way, watching from a distance. He heard laughter, real laughter, coming from the room down the hall. No hesitation. No permission asked. Elodie ran out holding an old drawing. "Daddy," she said quickly, "my friend wants to see my picture. Can I lend it to her?" Adrian nodded. "Of course." She turned to go, then paused, her eyes bright. "I don't keep my drawings to hide anymore. I keep them to tell stories." Adrian sat down. His heart filled with a quiet, unrestrained emotion, like a song without crescendo that still makes you cry. That night, Elodie went to bed early. The room smelled of lavender, bathed in warm yellow light spilling through the curtain. Adrian stood at the threshold, not entering. Just watching, like a guardian of dreams who knew not to take them for his own. The room was no longer a shelter. It was a room with an open door, where memories, feelings, and voices had room to breathe. And Elodie, the little girl who once apologized to the floor for existing, was now dreaming among pages of freedom, asking no one's permission to be herself. No more silent box. No more, "Did I do something wrong?" Only a little girl. And a peaceful sleep. That was chapter 9. And it had only just begun. 3 weeks after Elisa's follow-up visit, a letter slipped quietly into Adrian's mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a cream-colored envelope, the slanted handwriting unmistakably familiar. He recognized it at once, Vanessa. He stood at the doorstep for a long while, the letter in his hand, early winter sunlight spreading faintly across the steps. He had thought he would be angry, or cold, or simply toss it without reading. But he didn't. He opened it carefully, like reopening an old wound he wasn't sure had scarred over. "Adrian, I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I'm not even sure this letter should exist. But if you're holding it, it means I wrote it. And if you're reading it, it means you're still a kinder man than I ever gave you credit for. I've entered treatment. The doctor says it'll take a long time to unlearn the things I used to call normal. Brandon is gone, not with drama or shouting. Just one morning I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I think of Elodie every day. I don't reach out, I don't try to check in. I know I don't deserve to. I only hope, if you can, keep her safe. Don't let her feel small like I once made her feel. You owe me nothing. But if Elodie ever asks about me, please don't turn me into a monster. Tell her I'm trying to learn how to be human again, piece by piece. Vanessa." Adrian read it, then placed the letter into a drawer beside the one Vanessa had sent after the trial. He didn't plan to write back. Not out of anger, but because not every ending requires a conversation. A few days later, Elodie brought home a notice from school there would be a small holiday performance for Christmas. Each student would present something special: storytelling, singing, poetry, or live drawing. "What will you do?" Adrian asked as they sorted through frames in the living room. Elodie bit her lip. "I'm not sure yet." "You could draw," Adrian suggested. "Or sing Falling Stars, you sing it in the bathroom all the time." Elodie laughed, a sound that came more and more often now, and each time still caught Adrian in the chest. "No," she shook her head, "I want to tell a story." Adrian looked at her, surprised. "What story?" "I'm writing one," she said, pulling a small spiral notebook from her backpack. He recognized it. It was the diary she carried everywhere, filled with drawings of houses, trees, and sunlight. "Can you read it to me?" Elodie nodded, sat down, feet swinging, voice small but clear. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a house without laughter. She learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and apologize quickly. People thought she was well behaved. But really, she only knew how to disappear. Until one day, someone didn't ask, 'Why are you so quiet?' but said, 'I see you.' From that day, the little girl started drawing herself again, every line, every laugh. She no longer apologized for existing. And every night before bed, instead of whispering, 'I'm sorry,' she said, 'I'm here. I'm really here.'" Adrian swallowed hard. He couldn't speak. Elodie just smiled, a little shy, and closed the notebook. "I think that's a wonderful story," he said, his voice hoarse. "Do you think I should tell it on stage?" "I think, if you do, people will never forget it." The performance came quickly. The school gym was transformed into a cozy little stage with warm yellow lights and rows of plastic chairs. Parents gathered, children's voices chattered like sparrows. Adrian sat in the third row, hands tight in his lap, heart uneasy. When Elodie stepped onto the stage, the light hit her hair like a halo. She held her notebook, lifted her chin, and looked straight ahead. She didn't tremble. She didn't search for familiar eyes. She simply spoke, each word soaking into the air. When she finished, the hall was silent for a breath. Then applause erupted, not the kind for a cute performance, but the kind given when people recognize something true. Adrian didn't cry. Not because he wasn't moved, but because his heart was already so full there was no room left for tears. That night, Elodie went to bed early, tired from emotion, but the kind of tired that feels warm. Adrian closed her door, turned off the hallway light, and stood there for a few minutes. In his hand was a copy of her story. Elodie had slipped it into his pocket after the show with a small line written at the bottom. "You were the first one who saw me. Thank you for not closing your eyes." He folded the page and placed it in his wallet right next to the oldest photo of Elodie he carried, the one where she laughed so hard her eyes disappeared into sunlight. Now that smile was no longer just a memory. It was returning, day by day, and this time no one could ever take it away. On a winter Saturday morning, snow fell gently outside the kitchen window. Elodie sat at the table, holding a cup of hot chocolate Adrian had made himself. She was drawing a castle on a hilltop, with waving flags, a suspension bridge, and the sun behind it. But what made Adrian stop as he passed by was a small detail. She had drawn herself standing on the balcony, arms outstretched, smiling. No longer the girl curled up in a corner. No longer a house with no door. Adrian said nothing. He was afraid that if he spoke, the moment would disappear like breath on glass. Elodie looked up and caught his gaze. "Did you see what I drew, Dad?" "I did," he said, pulling out a chair beside her. "You're right there at the top." She nodded slightly. "Because I'm not on the floor anymore." The simple sentence caught in his throat. That afternoon, Adrian took Elodie to her scheduled appointment with her therapist. Dr. Margot Stein was a woman in her 50s, with a voice soft as wool and eyes that never rushed. Adrian usually waited in the lounge, sipping machine coffee and reading a book. But today, Margot invited him in for the final session. "She's making wonderful progress," she said once Elodie had stepped outside to play with the Lego set in the corner. "But there's one thing we need to be mindful of." Adrian sat straighter. "What is it?" "Elodie's sense of safety right now is entirely centered around you. That's not a bad thing. But if you were to be absent, even temporarily, her world might feel like it's falling apart." Adrian stayed quiet. He knew what she said wasn't a warning. It was a truth he needed to be ready for. "We need to help Elodie rebuild her inner framework," Margot continued. "A psychological scaffolding that doesn't rely on one single person." "How?" he asked. "Bring more trustworthy people into her circle," she said. "Relatives, friends, teachers. Especially those who offer emotional connection, not just function." Adrian nodded thoughtfully. After the session, he drove Elodie home. She dozed off in the back seat, clutching her stuffed bunny named Charles, her tangled hair catching the soft light. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He knew he couldn't be her entire world forever, but he could be the foundation of the one she would build. The following week, Adrian arranged a visit to Elodie's grandmother. His mother, Amalia. The silver-haired woman lived in a warm cabin by the woods, where Adrian had grown up. The house smelled of pine and sunlight. At first, Elodie was shy, but by the end of the afternoon, after baking cookies and hearing fairy tales told in Amalia's soft, German-accented voice, she moved through the house as if it had always belonged to her. "Are you ever scared?" Elodie asked one evening, as the three of them sat around the fireplace. "Scared of what, sweetheart?" Amalia replied. "Of living alone. Of no one seeing you." Amalia smiled gently and placed a hand on Elodie's head. "I'm not alone. I have the trees, the cat, the blue sky, and now I have you." Elodie was quiet for a while, then whispered, "I used to live like no one saw me." Amalia squeezed her hand. "Then from now on, be loud about your being. Anyone who doesn't see you, that's their loss." Adrian watched silently, his heart tight with the knowledge that today, another piece had fallen into place in his daughter's life. When they returned home, Elodie drew another picture. This time, it was Grandma's house, with chimney smoke, pine trees, and a woman in a red apron holding a plate of cookies. "I'll give this to Grandma next time," she said. "So she'll remember me." Adrian nodded. "She'll keep it forever." Elodie paused and looked at him intently. "Dad, if one day you don't come back, who can I call?" He leaned down, meeting her eyes. "You can call Grandma, your teacher, Dr. Stein, Mr. Thomas next door. But most importantly, you must call yourself first. Remember, you have the right to be seen, to be heard, to exist." She nodded, not because she fully understood, but because she believed. That night, as Adrian turned off the light and stood to leave her room, Elodie called out, "Dad." "Yes. I don't think I'm little anymore." He turned back, smiling. "I don't think so either." And he closed the door behind him, knowing that a new chapter had begun. On a March morning, the air was crisp and the pale gray sky was slowly turning blue. Elodie woke earlier than usual. When Adrian entered the room, he found her sitting by the window, wrapped in a light blanket, watching a group of sparrows flutter along the windowsill. "Do you think today is a special day?" she asked without turning around. Adrian raised his eyebrows, curious. "What do you think?" "I don't know, but it feels like it." He sat beside her, quietly watching the outside world. Days like this, ordinary to the world but meaningful to a recovering heart, Adrian had learned to honor them. "Then let's do something different today," he said. Elodie turned, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Like, a walk in the woods?" He nodded. "With hot chocolate and a sketchbook?" She smiled, softer than ever. "And cookies too." By 10 in the morning, they reached the nearby forest. The trees were still bare from winter, but fresh green grass had begun to sprout beneath them. Adrian spread a blanket under the big oak, and Elodie removed her coat, sitting cross-legged with her sketchbook in her lap. "Do you think there are wolves here?" she asked, half joking. "Probably. But the wolves here eat cookies and play chess," Adrian said, pouring hot chocolate into paper cups and handing her one. Elodie giggled, and that sound still took his breath away, like he lived a little more each time he heard it. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "I'm drawing the hill where I'll build my castle," Elodie said, without looking up. "But this time it's not just me. There's you, Grandma Amalia, Dr. Margot, even the cat at the gas station." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "What cat?" Elodie rolled her eyes. "The black one. Last time we got gas, it licked my hand. I named it Friedrich." He nodded. "Very aristocratic." She smiled, then fell into a long silence. As the sun climbed higher, Elodie lay back on the blanket, eyes half closed. Adrian lay beside her, arms folded behind his head. They didn't need to speak. The breeze rustled through sparse branches, and sunlight scattered like gold across the forest floor. A morning that seemed ordinary, but to them, it was a quiet celebration of life, of peace, of all they had reclaimed. "Dad," Elodie said softly, "I think I'm ready." Adrian turned to her slowly. "Ready for what?" "Ready to stop checking the window 3 times before bed." His heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Why do you think you can?" Still with her eyes closed, she answered, "Because I'm not scared anymore." He didn't reply. He just squeezed her hand. One small gesture worth 1,000 words. Not every recovery needs fireworks. Sometimes it's a child declaring she won't check the lock again. That night, Elodie brushed her hair in front of the mirror, warm yellow light falling on her soft brown hair. "Dad?" she asked, still holding the brush. "Yes. If I didn't dare to speak before, is it too late now?" Adrian came over, sat on the bed, his voice warm and steady. "It's never too late, as long as you speak." She looked at him in the mirror, her eyes more serious than her age. Back then, I thought I was the problem. Like, if I hadn't broken the glass, if I hadn't spilled the water, maybe the house would be quiet. I thought I had to shrink so no one would be angry. Adrian stepped forward and hugged her from behind through the reflection. "You were never the problem. You are the best thing I've ever had." She turned and wrapped her arms around him. No tears, just a hug, strong, full of meaning. That night, Elodie turned off her own light. She got into bed without checking the windows, without looking at the door. Before sleep, she asked, "What are we doing tomorrow, Dad?" "Anything you want," Adrian answered from the doorway. "Then, let's build a castle." He smiled. "With what?" "With books, and vanilla ice cream, and laughter, and a little bit of magic." She closed her eyes, still smiling. And as the door clicked shut, Adrian stood silently in the dark, to hold on to what had just happened. A child no longer afraid. A father learning to listen. A home being rebuilt on trust. 3 months after Elodie was given the right to live in her own home, the old wounds had begun to form new skin. Not all of them had vanished, but now, instead of being a place that held secrets, the small apartment in the middle of Copenhagen had become a shelter, for growth, for freedom, for a little girl who once learned to apologize for simply existing. One Saturday morning, the sky was overcast but not cold. Elodie placed a slice of peanut butter toast on a plate, her fingers sticky with strawberry jam. Adrian was reorganizing files, getting ready for an upcoming video meeting. The apartment was quiet, warm, filled with the blended scents of coffee and cookies. "Dad," Elodie spoke up, "I want to try something new." He looked up, curious. "What is it?" She sat down across from him and pulled a color-printed sheet from her backpack. An application form titled Children's Theater Club Registration. Adrian looked at the form, then at his daughter. "You want to be on stage?" Elodie bit her lip and nodded. "I think I'll be nervous, but I want to try." A quiet wave of emotion swept through his chest. She had once been afraid to speak up in class, avoided every pair of eyes. And now she wanted to stand under the spotlight. "Then you'll do it," he said softly. "And I'll sit in the front row, clapping the loudest." Elodie gave a small smile. "Just don't cry, okay?" He pretended to be serious. "No promises." On the first day of theater class, Elodie wore a hoodie with a cat riding a rocket. Her hands clutched her backpack tightly as she stood outside the rehearsal room with its wooden floor and deep red stage curtains. Adrian sat in the car nearby, watching from a distance, hands resting on the steering wheel but not starting the engine. Moments later, Elodie came back to the car, expressionless. Adrian rolled down the window. "You okay?" She nodded. "There were a lot of people. I got scared." He didn't rush to reassure her. He simply asked, "Do you want to go home?" She thought for a second, then shook her head. "I want to stay. Just, can you wait nearby?" He nodded. "I'll be in the parking lot. If you need anything, just text me." Elodie took a deep breath, then turned and walked slowly back into the room. Her figure was small, but her back was straight, her head held high. The session ended almost 2 hours later. Elodie came out holding a yellow sheet, their first lesson on facial expression and stage listening. She didn't say much, just played a soft piano piece on the car stereo on the way home. "Did you enjoy it?" Adrian asked as they drove. "It was hard, but interesting. That was all. And it was enough." That evening, Elodie sat on the living room floor, taping printed lines of dialogue to the wall. Adrian watched how carefully she peeled the tape, how gently she pressed each phrase onto the surface, as if building a new world. It struck him. These walls, which once felt like confinement, were now holding dreams. He stepped closer and read one of the lines she had just put up. "I'm not small. I'm just waiting for the right time to grow." "Did you write this?" he asked, voice tight. Elodie smiled, not turning around. "No, it's a line from the script, but it feels like me." Adrian nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like you to me too." She added another line, then suddenly said, "Dad, can I tell you something honest?" "Always." Elodie paused. "I used to hate myself. I thought if I didn't exist, that house would be easier to breathe in." He didn't answer. He walked over and sat beside her on the floor. "How about now?" he asked. Elodie looked up at the wall, now filled with golden phrases like a clumsy, honest poem. "Now I'm learning how to love myself again." Adrian gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You're doing so well, and you're not alone." The theater club became a rhythm. Every week, Elodie went without missing a session. Every return added a new page to the script on her wall. When the final rehearsal arrived, she invited Adrian and Rosa, the quiet woman who had once changed everything, to watch. On the small stage, beneath soft lights, Elodie stood among 4 other children, her gaze slightly wandering, but her voice steady. "I'm not a shadow. I have a name." No one in the audience said a word. Adrian clenched his hands. Rosa wiped her tears with a cloth handkerchief. Elodie looked down and saw her father in the front row, as he had promised, and smiled. That night, over dinner, Elodie shared a story about a classmate who had once stayed silent out of fear. She said she held the girl's hand when she cried. "I didn't say much," Elodie recounted. "I just said, I used to be scared too. But now I'm standing here." Adrian looked at her. He didn't speak. He just quietly refilled her glass, his hand trembling slightly. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing in life is when a child who once learned how to be silent finally learns to speak, and even knows how to help someone else do the same. Summer came to Copenhagen slowly, gently, like a long overdue embrace. The rain fell less often, and sunlight stretched across the pavement like someone trying to dry what had long been damp. Elodie sat by her bedroom window, holding a navy blue leather notebook. No lock, no decorations. Just a new journal, blank and clean, like the journey she was about to write, no longer rooted in fear, but guided by will. Outside, Adrian was fixing a hammock between 2 steel posts in the backyard. He wasn't great at such things, but he had promised Elodie they would read outside together that summer. A small promise, perhaps, but one she looked forward to the most. The end-of-year parent-teacher meeting took place in the 2nd week of June. Adrian arrived early, wearing a simple white shirt and carrying a folder of notes. Elodie had already received praise from her homeroom teacher via email, but he wanted to hear it in person. Not grades, but her emotional state. Ms. Agnes welcomed him with a warm smile and invited him to sit at Elodie's usual desk. The room smelled of pencils, paper, and children's artwork on the walls. A small universe painted in bright colors. "Mr. Leonhardt," she began, "I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that Elodie has changed not just this class, but me as well." Adrian's grip on his folder tightened slightly. Ms. Agnes handed him a file filled with Elodie's recent drawings. No more windowless rooms. No more characters without mouths. Now there were forests, open-door homes, and people holding hands beneath star-filled skies. A student who once said nothing is now the first to volunteer to read aloud. Ms. Agnes smiled. Not to be the center of attention, but because she believes her voice matters. Adrian looked through the drawings, his chest tight. One showed Elodie on a hilltop, hair flying, raising a lantern. Beneath the drawing was a line. "I don't need saving. I just need to be seen." A week later, Elodie was invited to speak at a workshop for children who had overcome adversity. Not to retell trauma, but to inspire. At 9 years old, she stood on stage, microphone trembling in her hand, but her eyes were bright, like the morning star. "I used to think that if I stayed quiet long enough, people would stop hurting me," Elodie said, her voice now firm. "But in the end, silence only made me disappear from myself." In the audience, Adrian sat in the 3rd row, eyes unblinking. Rosa was there too, her fingers curled around a small prayer bead. "Now I know I don't have to be small to be loved," Elodie said. "I just have to dare to be me." The applause wasn't loud, but it was sincere. And to Elodie, it wasn't praise. It was recognition. Summer passed in slow afternoons reading in hammocks, walks along the harbor, and nights spent making ice cream at home. No grand plans, no packed schedule. Just 2 people learning how to live again, not for the past, but for the present. One evening, as Adrian folded Elodie's laundry, she walked in, her hair still damp from a bath. In her hand was a piece of paper, not a drawing, but a letter. "Can you read it?" she asked. He nodded, accepting it. The paper was slightly damp from her wet fingers. The letter was scribbled, but every word was clear. "Dad, I don't know when everything will feel normal again, but I don't need things to be perfect anymore. I just need you not to leave. I just need you to believe in me. I don't apologize for everything now. I'm sorry I once thought I didn't deserve to be loved. But I know now I was wrong. Thank you for coming back. Your daughter, Elodie. Adrian didn't cry, not because he wasn't moved, but because tears weren't enough to express what surged through him. Gratitude, redemption, and love. He folded the letter gently, as if it were treasure. Then he pulled his daughter into his arms. I never left, he whispered. I just needed time to learn how to truly see you, and now I do, so clearly. Before bed, Elodie opened her journal and wrote one more line. I'm not a scar. I'm an unfinished painting. And as she closed the book and placed it on her nightstand, her eyes drifted shut in peace. Outside, the sky that night was full of stars. A new sky just for a girl who was once a shadow. Now the one who writes the light. Autumn arrived early in Copenhagen. The leaves began to change color, yellow and red, like quiet lanterns drifting down from the sky. Elodie was now in 4th grade, and the mornings in the small Leonhardt apartment had taken on a new, peaceful rhythm: coffee for Adrian, toast for Elodie, and soft jazz playing from the little speaker on the bookshelf. Adrian still worked at his company, but only 3 days a week. The rest of his time was spent picking Elodie up from school, taking her to art class, cooking with her, and simply being present. But today was different. A community gathering was being held at the neighborhood center where Elodie would read an excerpt from the first short story she had ever finished. She had named it The Keeper of the Light, a tale about a girl once locked inside a silent castle until she found the key using nothing but her own voice. The small room was full: other parents, children, teachers, and a few friends Elodie had met in the support group for children recovering from trauma. Rosa was there too, sitting quietly in the front row, hands clasped, her eyes filled with pride. Elodie stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple dress with a round collar, her hair braided to one side. No one had pushed her to be there. She had walked up on her own. Her small feet now carried the steadiness of someone who had walked through darkness. She took a breath. Hello, Elodie began. My name is Elodie Leonhardt. I used to think I was invisible, but now I know you only go unseen when you stop seeing yourself. She opened her storybook and began reading, her voice steady. And when the girl stepped out of the castle, she didn't look back. Not because she hated it, but because she no longer belonged to it. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked slowly, carrying the lantern lit by her own courage. When Elodie finished, the room fell silent for a moment, then applause erupted. No one shouted. No one jumped to their feet. But no one left their seat without wiping their eyes. Adrian sat still, nothing to hide. He wasn't proud because his daughter had overcome. He was proud because Elodie had chosen to stand, not to win, but to live. That evening, the two of them walked through Frederiksberg Park. The chill in the air was just enough for Elodie to tuck herself into her father's coat. In her hand was the first printed copy of her book, just 50 copies, self-published, for the community. Elodie looked up at the sky. Do you think I could be a real writer one day? She asked, her voice still laced with shyness. Adrian stopped walking, then sat on a bench and patted the seat beside him. I think, he said, you already are one. Not because you have a book, but because you used words to unlock your heart. You lit a lantern in the dark. Elodie smiled, this time a complete smile. She no longer asked, am I allowed to stay? Now she asked, how far am I allowed to go? And Adrian's answer was, as far as you want. But you won't go alone. A week later, Elodie wrote the final line in her first journal, a notebook now filled with words, drawings, and the days of her healing. I used to think I was small and had to apologize for existing. But now I know I don't have to say sorry for being here. There's a place for me in this world, and I'll fill it with stories only I can tell. She closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf, then walked into the living room where Adrian was reading. She curled up on the sofa, her head resting on his leg. Dad? Yes, sweetheart? How do people know when they're okay? Adrian thought for a moment, gently running his fingers through her hair. When they stop running from the dark, he said, and start lighting the way for someone else. Elodie nodded. Then she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep, no nightmares, no fear. Just the sleep of someone who no longer needs permission to feel safe. And that was the end, not a grand finale, not a celebration, but a quiet evening in a small apartment where a little girl who had once been forgotten was now growing with the unshakable belief that she matters. She has a voice. And she belongs.